Well, because I had a lot of wrong, message information about Africa, like a poor and messy and all this stuff before I came.
Yeah.
But when I landed, I was amazed by the nature. The people, they're so simple. When you look at their eyes, they're full of passion. They want to change.
All right, let us talk to you the way people talk when the cameras are off and the microphones are muted. Something strange is happening in the world right now. The West, the same West that ignored Africa, mocked Africa, lectured Africa, is suddenly acting nervous. You can see it in their eyes during press conferences. You can hear it in the shaky tone of their Africa partnership speeches. And if you look closely, you'll notice a pattern. They're rushing to sign deals, rushing to host summits, rushing to act like they've always cared. But here's the truth nobody will admit on TV. Africa didn't change. Africa didn't suddenly become interesting. Africa simply woke up, and the West realized it too late. So let's take a deep breath, step into this story together, and talk honestly about what's really going on. The fear, the panic, and the power shift they desperately hope you don't notice. Let's start this honestly. Like two people sitting down and finally deciding to tell the truth. The West didn't suddenly fall in love with Africa. They didn't wake up one morning, stretch their arms, sip their coffee and say, you know what? We should respect Africa now. No. What happened was much simpler and much uglier. They realized they're running out of time. And the clock that's killing them is the same clock that's empowering Africa. Think about everything the West claims to be building right now. Electric cars, clean energy grids, advanced robotics, artificial intelligence systems, satellites, missile defense, and quantum computing. Sounds impressive, right? But here's the twist nobody talks about. Every single one of those innovations depends on minerals found mostly in Africa, not a little bit. Not shared among continents, mostly Africa. If Africa shut its mineral door for even 6 months, Western companies would collapse faster than their polite speeches could cover it up, and they know it. That's why, suddenly, you see Western presidents visiting African capitals they once couldn't even pronounce correctly. That's why CEOs who never cared about Africa are now writing long essays about Africa's potential. It's not admiration, it's desperation. Because Africa owns the future. And the West is running out of oxygen. They saw China move first, building roads, railways, ports, manufacturing parks, renewable energy plants, and long-term mineral contracts. China didn't wait for permission. China didn't give speeches. China just showed up with deals, respect, and a strategy. Suddenly, the West woke up and realized they don't own the room anymore. They're just guests.
We don't interfere in the internal affairs of African countries, impose our will on the African countries, attach any political condition on the economic aid for Africa.
Then Russia entered military partnerships, intelligence cooperation, and security training. Turkey followed with factories and drones. India strengthened trade routes. Gulf states brought capital. One by one, nations that the West never expected to be rivals were already sitting comfortably in Africa's living room. By the time the West knocked on the door, the sofa was full. This is the part Western analysts whisper behind closed doors, but will never say publicly. If Africa chooses its partners carefully, the entire Western technological empire becomes fragile. Without Congo's cobalt, Europe can't build EV batteries. Without Zimbabwe's lithium, American companies slow down. Without Niger's uranium, their nuclear power targets crumble. Without African gold and graphite, their industrial expansion stutters. So now they show up smiling, but the smile doesn't reach their eyes. They say partnership, but their actions say, please save us. They say collaboration, but their tone says, we're in trouble. And here's the wildest part. Africa hasn't even fully awakened its potential, yet Africa is still warming up. The continent hasn't even used half of its economic power. But even that half is enough to make the West panic like someone who suddenly realizes the ground beneath their feet is cracking. The truth is simple. The West is not interested in Africa because Africa is rising. They're interested because without Africa, the West cannot rise at all. And that leads to the next question. If minerals caused this panic, what pushed the West into a full-blown geopolitical crisis? The moment Africa stepped toward BRICS, that's when the ground truly shifted. And trust me, the West felt that shift in their bones. Picture the Western financial system like a tall mansion built on one foundation, the US dollar. For decades, everything depended on that foundation staying firm. Trade, dollar, loans, dollar, sanctions, dollar, global control, dollar. The West ruled not because of moral superiority or great values, but because it controlled the currency everyone was forced to use. Now imagine someone quietly walks into the basement of that mansion and loosens the foundation. Not break it, not destroy it, just loosen it. That someone was BRICS. But here's the twist. BRICS alone wasn't enough. The West could still handle it. What truly caused panic was when Africa began moving toward BRICS. That changed everything. Suddenly, the world's youngest population, the world's mineral powerhouse, the future of food, the biggest emerging market, and one of the most strategically placed landmasses started shifting its weight. And the West felt the floor tilt underneath them. Because once Africa joins a non-Western financial ecosystem, the dollar loses its monopoly. And when the monopoly cracks even a little, Western power cracks with it.
BRICS was set up to degenerate our dollar and take our dollar as the standard, take it off as the standard. And that's okay if they want to play that game, but I can play that game too. So anybody that's in BRICS is getting a 10%.
Here's where the conflict gets real. African nations realize they don't have to beg for loans. They don't need to accept humiliating IMF conditions. They don't have to depend on Western ratings agencies. They can borrow from BRICS banks, trade in new currencies, negotiate fresh terms, and actually breathe. For the first time in modern history, Africa has options. And nothing is more dangerous to the West than an Africa with options. Imagine being a country that's used to snapping its fingers and watching the world obey. Then one day you snap your fingers, and Africa doesn't move. It just looks back at you calmly and says, "We're good. We have other friends now." That's exactly what happened. Western leaders scrambled. Suddenly, you saw Washington hosting US-Africa Summit, the EU calling for Africa strategy, France begging for renewed ties, and the UK discussing new partnerships. Before BRICS expansion, Africa was an afterthought. After BRICS expansion, Africa became the center of every Western speech. Why? Because if Africa uses BRICS systems, Western sanctions lose power. If Africa uses BRICS banks, the IMF loses relevance. If Africa uses BRICS currency, the dollar loses dominance. If Africa trades with BRICS, Europe and America lose their leverage. This isn't financial theory, this is survival. And the West knows that once Africa finds financial freedom, everything else, political independence, economic independence, strategic independence, follows naturally. Which brings us to the next question. If money is shaking, if currency power is slipping, if the West is losing control over how the world trades, then why does Europe look even more terrified than America? Europe isn't just worried. Europe looks scared. Scared in a way they don't want anyone to notice. Scared behind the smiles, behind the handshakes, behind the strategic partnership announcements. And the reason is simple, painfully simple. Europe is aging. Africa is young. And Europe knows it cannot survive this century without African youth. Let us explain it the way people speak when they're being honest and not diplomatic. Europe is running out of workers. It's not a theory. It's not a prediction. It's happening right now, in real time. Factories don't have young staff. Hospitals don't have enough nurses. Construction companies are begging for labor. Even their armies, yes, their armies, are struggling to recruit. Their populations are shrinking so fast that several European countries literally cannot replace themselves. Meanwhile, Africa is the youngest continent on Earth. The average African is 19. The average European, around 44.
Do you know what a youthquake is? Well, surprisingly, it is in the dictionary. A youthquake is an important social or political change, one that is triggered by young people. Say young voters oust a long-serving politician from power. That's a youthquake. Many experts say a global youthquake is coming, and its epicenter is Africa.
That gap is a monster, and Europe feels it breathing down its neck. So when Europe suddenly becomes interested in supporting African talent or creating opportunities for African youth, don't smile, don't clap, don't fall for that sweet marketing. Understand what's really going on. Europe doesn't want Africa to grow stronger. Europe wants Africa to stay just weak enough that its young people keep leaving. Because here's the harsh truth Europe hides. If Africa becomes wealthy, if Africa builds strong industries, if Africa creates millions of jobs, Africans will stay home. They'll stay with their families, with their culture, with their identity. And if Africans stay home, Europe collapses under its own demographic weight. This is why European governments panic every time Africa takes big steps towards sovereignty. This is why they were uncomfortable when the Sahel kicked them out militarily. This is why they freak out when African nations join BRICS. This is why they cry about democracy, only in countries they can no longer control. They need Africa to be dependent, not empowered. Whenever Europe talks about migration, pay attention to the strange hypocrisy. They don't want African migrants, but they desperately need African workers. They reject refugees at the border, but quietly recruit nurses from Nigeria and Ghana. They complain about population pressure, but sign agreements to attract African talent. It's a game, a very old one, and Africa is finally learning the rules. You'll hear European leaders talk endlessly about stability in Africa, but here's what they will never admit. Stability in Africa means Africans don't migrate. And if Africans don't migrate, Europe's economy starts coughing blood. So, of course, Europe is terrified. Of course, Europe is desperate. Of course, Europe is aggressively competing for Africa now. Because Africa's youth is powerful and Europe is running out of it. Which brings us to an even deeper fear. Not economic, not demographic, but military. Because if Europe is scared of losing African workers, imagine how terrified NATO is of losing African military space. So here's the next question. If Europe needs African youth to survive, what does the West need from Africa to maintain global military dominance? Let's pause for a second to say big thank you to the Black Culture Diary community, where Black voices, stories, and legacies are preserved and amplified. By becoming a member, you're not just supporting the channel, you're becoming part of a powerful cultural movement. Let's continue. All right, now let's step into the room Western generals don't let cameras see. Because what's happening militarily in Africa right now is the kind of thing that keeps NATO awake at 3 a.m., staring at maps, whispering things they would never repeat at a press conference. For decades, NATO treated Africa like its unofficial backyard. They wouldn't say it openly, but that's exactly how they acted. Western jets flew through African skies like they owned the sun. Western troops built bases on African soil as if the land were on rent. Western intelligence networks used African territory as secret corridors for surveillance, for drone warfare, for movements no African citizen ever got to approve. And Africa, for a long time, tolerated it. Not because it wanted to, but because it didn't feel strong enough to say no. Then something happened. Something historical. Something powerful. Something the West never expected in 1,000 years. Africa said no. Mali said no to French troops. Burkina Faso said no to foreign interference. Niger said no to the US base. Guinea said no to external pressure. The Sahel united, not around a Western agenda, but around their own. For the first time in modern African history, countries stood together and said, "We will secure ourselves." That sentence alone shook NATO like a punch to the chest. Because once Africa controls its own military space, the West loses more than access. They lose the advantage. They lose leverage. They lose the ability to shape African politics through security cooperation, those fancy words that often mean stay dependent on us. And here's the part NATO fears most. Russia walked into the space the West abandoned. Turkey arrived with drones that the West refused to share. China strengthened ports that the West had ignored for decades. Suddenly the West wasn't the referee, they weren't the commander, they weren't even on the field, they became spectators. You can almost feel the panic in their sudden accusations. Africa is turning authoritarian. Foreign influence is destabilizing the region. Democracy is under threat. Funny how all these statements magically appear only after Africa stops taking orders. Let's be real. The West isn't scared of instability. The West is scared of losing control. Because losing Africa's military space means losing drone routes, losing intelligence lines, losing surveillance corridors, losing pressure points, losing geopolitical access. And if they lose access, they lose power. This is why you suddenly see Western diplomats running around trying to fix relationships, restore cooperation, rebuild trust. They're not restoring anything, they're trying to get their foot back in a door that Africa has finally locked. And this raises a far deeper question, one that the West is terrified to face. If Africa can shut down Western military presence, if Africa can build alliances the West cannot break, if Africa can control its airspace, land, ports, and security, then what's next for Africa? What happens when Africa also controls the one thing the world can't live without, food? So here's the question that unfolds naturally. If Africa's military independence scares the West, how terrified are they of Africa becoming the world's food powerhouse? Here's a reminder to please like and share the video and subscribe to our channel to watch more videos on Black culture, history, civilization, and identity. Let's continue now. Food. The most basic thing on Earth. The thing no country, no army, no empire can survive without. Here's the quiet truth nobody in Europe or America says loudly. Their farmlands are dying. Europe's fields are drying under heat waves. America's crops are drowning in storms and burning in wildfires. Asia's rivers are evaporating. Even South America is struggling with unpredictable seasons. The planet is changing its climate. Therefore, the map of the world's food supply is changing too. And guess which continent sits at the center of the new agricultural future? Africa. 60% of the world's unused arable land is in Africa. 60%. Let that sink in. No other place on Earth has that kind of untouched potential. On top of that, Africa has the youngest farming population, the cheapest production costs, the most flexible climates, the largest landmass is ready for expansion. It's like nature designed Africa not just to feed itself, but to feed everyone else too. And the West has finally realized it. That's why suddenly you hear all these fancy phrases from European officials. We want to support African agriculture. We're committed to food security partnerships. We are ready to help Africa fight climate change. It sounds noble. It sounds compassionate. It sounds like friendship. But if you listen closely, really closely, you'll hear the real emotion behind the words, fear. Because if Africa controls the world's next food supply, then Africa controls leverage. The West has never had to face before. Think about how they used oil for decades, how they used loans, how they used sanctions, how they used military presence. Now imagine Africa having a resource even more powerful than oil, the ability to feed a hungry world. That's not just influence, that's power. So the West's new strategy isn't about helping Africa grow its food systems. It's about inserting itself into those systems before Africa fully realizes how valuable they are. That's what all these green deals and climate agreements are really about. Hidden inside them are clauses that give Western companies control over seeds, water rights, export prices, carbon credits, fertilizer markets, and even land development decisions. They want access, they want influence, they want a seat at the table before the world shifts and Africa becomes the one calling the shots. Because here's the truth, when you control food, you control survival. And when Africa understands the weight of that power, truly understands it, the global balance flips. But this takes us to something even bigger. Because if Africa controls minerals, youth, military geography, and now food, what happens when Africa controls something even more powerful? What happens when Africa controls the digital bloodstream of the world, the next internet, the next cloud, the next AI infrastructure? Now let's step into the part of the story almost nobody is talking about. Not because it's unimportant, but because it's terrifying for the West to admit. Africa is slowly becoming the center of the world's digital future. Yes, digital, not just minerals, not just food, not just youth or military geography. Digital power, the new bloodstream of the planet. And honestly, this is the part that feels the most surreal. Because it's happening quietly, softly. Almost in the background. No loud announcements, no dramatic headlines, just quiet construction, quiet partnerships, quiet cables are being laid underwater, quiet data hubs rising on African soil. But if you look closely, you start seeing the pattern. Undersea internet cables are wrapping themselves around the continent like veins connecting to a heart. Big tech companies are pouring in money, not charity, not development, but investment. Serious investment. Because they see something Western media hasn't figured out yet, the next stage of the internet will need space, energy, and geographical advantage. And Africa has all three. Kenya is building massive data centers. South Africa is expanding cloud hubs. Nigeria is becoming a digital traffic giant. Ethiopia is building new communication corridors. Bit by bit, Africa is turning into the crossroads of global data flow. And here's the part that should make you pause for a second. Whoever controls data controls everything. AI, banking, mobile payments, satellite communication, cybersecurity, global trade systems, streaming, digital identities, intelligence networks, everything. Data is the new oil, and Africa is becoming the world's pipeline. Now, the West knows this. Of course they do. They have teams of analysts studying Africa day and night. They can see the shift as clearly as we do, but they're late. They hesitated for too long. They were too busy lecturing Africa to notice Africa building its own future. And by the time they turned around, China was already partnering on cybersecurity, India was already laying down digital corridors. The Gulf was already investing in cloud cities. Russia was already offering advanced tech cooperation. The West woke up and said, wait, what just happened? And Africa simply kept moving. You can hear the panic in Western tech speeches now. The sudden interest in African digital cooperation. The sudden talk about protecting Africa from cyber threats. The sudden push to strengthen digital democracy. These phrases sound noble, but behind them is one quiet truth. They're afraid of losing influence over the world's next internet. Because once Africa controls global data routes, Africa won't just be part of the digital age, Africa will shape it. And that's the moment everything shifts. Africa with mineral power is influential. Africa with food power is necessary. Africa with youth power is unstoppable. Africa with military power is sovereign. But Africa with digital power? That's a whole new world. A world where the West doesn't decide the future anymore. A world where Africa finally sits at the center, not the sidelines. And so we end with the only conclusion that makes sense. Africa isn't just rising. Africa is positioning itself as the heart of the world that's coming. The West knows it. Africa is realizing it. And the future is shifting in Africa's direction, whether the world likes it or not. Do you still think Africa is rising, or has it already risen while the world wasn't paying attention? Let us know in the comment section. If Africa controls minerals, food, youth, military space, and now digital power, who really controls the future? Do you want to watch more videos like this one? If so, subscribe to our channel and press the bell icon next to it. We have decided to bring videos on something nobody talks about: the Black culture, civilization, history, and evidence about how glorious Blacks have been. Thanks for watching, and until the next video, stay tuned.